President Trump signed the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran on Wednesday evening at Versailles. Iran's President Pezeshkian displayed his countersigned copy shortly thereafter. The agreement has drawn backlash from all sides in the United States. Many argue it achieves less than the deal signed with Tehran in 2015. Joining me now is Phil Gordon, who as a top official in President Obama's National Security Council was instrumental in that earlier deal with Iran. He is now a scholar at Brookings. Phil, welcome. Let me first ask you, when people are looking at this, can they expect that the war is over? Is the 60-day truce going to hold?
Look, I think there's a decent chance, at least, that the truce holds simply because it is in the interest of both sides. This deal gives Iran, starting right away, a significant oil revenue. Iran is now allowed to sell oil, not only sell oil as it was before in a discounted way.
Hey guys, Jack here. This is still developing. Republican senators, including Cruz, Graham, and Wicker, are publicly calling Trump's Iran deal a disaster and appeasement with unusual ferocity. These are not fringe voices, but the party's national security hawks breaking with Trump on a major foreign policy issue. Let us be precise about what is actually happening and what is not. Trump has not formally surrendered to Iran. He has not signed a deal. The ceasefire framework that is being reported, the package that Republican hawks are attacking so aggressively, is still an emerging proposal. Something that is being discussed, being negotiated through intermediaries, being weighed against other options. The terms that have been reported include pausing large-scale U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iranian targets,
but to earn hundreds of millions of dollars per day. So Iran has an interest in sticking with this. And the United States certainly has an interest in sticking with this because it doesn't want to resume the war. So Iran and the United States will do what they can to keep it alive. That is not to say that there aren't a million things you could think of that could go wrong, starting with Lebanon. Because as you know, Fareed, Iran insisted that ceasefire in Lebanon be part of the ceasefire between the United States and Iran. Indeed, the MOU itself, the very first paragraph, mentions Lebanon 3 times, which underscores how significant that is to Iran. So if the United States can't keep a ceasefire in Lebanon too, the whole MOU could fall apart. But I think the core interest of the United States in Iran, again, means a decent chance that at least the first part of the deal sticks. Whether we get to a longer comprehensive deal, we can discuss. That seems much less likely.
When you look at the broader deal, is the big stumbling block likely to be what to do about the 400 kilograms of enriched uranium the Iranians have?
Easing some sanctions and seeking Iranian guarantees to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and reduce attacks on Gulf oil infrastructure. No final agreement has been announced. No formal surrender document has been signed. But the fact that Trump is apparently seriously considering a deal along those lines, the fact that the terms have been sufficiently concrete to be reported by multiple outlets and to generate specific responses from specific senators means the fight over whether to make that deal is happening right now. And the fight is ferocious, and it is happening entirely within the Republican Party, which is what makes it so significant and so revealing.
So yeah, I think on the nuclear side, there are 2 things. There are the 400 kilograms, which Trump talked about from the start, getting out that HEU, because as you know, that is enriched to 60%, which is a short step away from weapons grade. And they have 400 kilograms of it, which is enough for more than 10 nuclear weapons. So there's that. And there's the state of Iran's enrichment program. And one of the reasons there wasn't a nuclear deal, notwithstanding all of these negotiations before the war, is that the Trump administration was insisting on zero enrichment. And Iran said no, and that led the Trump administration to launch the war. So those are the 2 big things that would have to be agreed if there's going to be this comprehensive nuclear deal, to get rid of or downblend the highly enriched uranium and to have some sort of cap or ban on enrichment. But once again, just like on the first part, Iran seems to have all of the leverage here. It's the Trump administration that doesn't want to restart the war. So you can be sure that Iran is going to demand a very big price if it's going to concede on the HEU or enrichment. And lastly, even just the other day,
about where Trump's second term is heading on one of the most consequential foreign policy questions of his presidency. Let us understand what the hawks are actually objecting to, because the specific criticisms matter and they go beyond general complaints about being tough or weak. Senator Ted Cruz has been among the loudest voices against the rumored deal, and his objections are detailed and specific. Cruz has warned that any agreement that leaves Iran's Islamist regime in power, still able to enrich uranium, still controlling the Strait of Hormuz, still positioned as a dominant regional force, still receiving what he describes as billions in sanctions relief and unfrozen assets.
Trump, who is now like making the case for the deal by embracing Iranian arguments like its neighbors have ballistic missiles, so it deserves ballistic missiles. Trump was saying, well, if the neighbors have nuclear programs, Iran should get one too. So it looks like we've tipped our hand even on these nuclear issues, which is ironic and tragic because those are the things we refused to concede on, which led to the war.
On the Obama nuclear deal, you had ferocious critics from Bibi Netanyahu, Donald Trump, all these people. In light of what's happened, what do you make, what happened to their criticisms? Have any of them been in some way, fulfilled? Have they been able to get some traction on the issues they were concerned about?
No, the comparison with the Obama nuclear deal, the JCPOA, is really interesting because, Fareed, normally in like political science or international relations, unlike hard sciences, you don't get a chance to rerun an experiment. Like what would have happened if we had done something different? But this is kind of a replay of JCPOA.
Would be a catastrophic error, not just a mistake, a catastrophic error. That language is not accidental. Cruz is trying to mark this deal as the kind of historic foreign policy failure that gets attached to a president's legacy permanently, the kind of mistake that defines how history judges a presidency. And he is doing it before the deal is finalized, which is itself significant. He is not waiting to see what the final terms look like and then evaluating them. He is publicly attacking the deal before it exists in order to build political pressure against Trump agreeing to it at all.
President Trump and others for more than 10 years were very specific in saying the JCPOA was a bad deal. If we only use maximum pressure and a credible threat of force, we can get them to do a much better deal. And we can do that without a war. And they even got irritated when people said, well, you could try that, but it might lead to a war. And then they got a chance for a do-over, essentially. They were in charge. Trump tore up the JCPOA, and so we're going to do this differently. He did his maximum pressure, but he didn't get the deal, and he did get the war. In fact, he didn't even get the deal after the war. Now, we'll see where this lands, but an important point about the comparison between the JCPOA and this is that the JCPOA actually existed. It was a comprehensive nuclear agreement with all sorts of texts and annexes. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council. It was implemented. It had major verifications provisions. All we have now is a commitment by Iran, essentially, to talk about nuclear issues, which they were prepared to do even before this war.
That is an aggressive and deliberate strategy, and it tells you how seriously Cruz and other hawks take the risk that Trump will accept terms they view as unacceptable. Senator Lindsey Graham, usually one of Trump's most reliable allies on national security matters, has been similarly pointed in his criticism. Graham has said that a deal leaving Iran perceived as the dominant regional power in the Middle East would be a nightmare for Israel, that it would reward Iran's aggression, that it would signal to every adversary watching that attacking American interests and then offering to stop gets you relief and legitimacy rather than consequences. Graham has built his entire political identity around a hawkish foreign policy that refuses to reward adversarial behavior. And he is watching a president he has consistently defended appear to be moving toward exactly the kind of deal that his entire worldview says you should never make. The discomfort is visible. The criticism is real. And the fact that it is coming from Graham a senator whose loyalty to Trump has survived tests that broke other alliances, tells you how serious the substantive foreign policy disagreement actually is. This is not performance. This is Graham saying out loud that he thinks Trump is about to make a mistake he cannot defend. Now let us talk about what Senator Roger Wicker said, because his statement may be the most significant of all the Republican criticisms. Not just because of what he said, but because of who he is and what his position represents. Wicker is the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. That is not a backbench role. That is one of the most powerful positions in the entire United States Senate on matters of national security and military policy. When the Armed Services Chair calls something a disaster, not a concern, not a worry, not something that needs more discussion, but a disaster, that is a statement with institutional weight behind it. Wicker's specific objection was to reports of a 60-day ceasefire. He called it a disaster that would make everything achieved by what the military called Operation Epic Fury essentially worthless. He is arguing that the military operations against Iran accomplished something real, that they degraded Iranian capabilities in meaningful ways, and that agreeing to a ceasefire before that degradation has been converted into a permanent political settlement throws away the leverage that those military operations created. In Wicker's view, Trump is standing at the point of maximum American leverage and walking away from it, trading a genuinely strong negotiating position for a deal that leaves fundamental problems: Iran's nuclear program, Iran's regional influence, Iran's control over the strait, essentially unresolved. And if Wicker is right about the leverage, if the military operations genuinely created conditions that could have produced a more favorable settlement, then his criticism is not just about politics. It is about strategic opportunity cost, about what could have been achieved and what is apparently being traded away. The fact that the chairman of the Armed Services Committee is making this argument publicly, with the kind of specificity and force that he is using, means that the Republican Party's foreign policy establishment is genuinely alarmed by the direction Trump is heading. Let us put all of this specific Republican criticism into the broader context of the split that is emerging inside the GOP over Iran policy, because the picture is more complicated than simply hawks attacking Trump. There are actually two distinct factions within the Republican coalition on this issue, and they are pulling in opposite directions. On one side, you have the traditional foreign policy hawks, Cruz, Graham, Wicker, and others who come from the Reagan-era tradition of peace through strength, of never negotiating under duress, of maintaining maximum pressure until the adversary makes genuine concessions that go beyond cosmetic adjustments. For this faction, the whole point of the military operations against Iran was to create the conditions for a settlement that permanently reduces Iran's capacity to threaten American interests and regional stability. Anything that falls short of that objective, any deal that leaves Iran's regime intact, its nuclear infrastructure functional, its regional influence maintained, is by definition a failure, regardless of how it gets packaged publicly. On the other side, you have the populist and war-weary wing of the Republican coalition, the voters and the representatives who supported Trump precisely because he promised to get America out of foreign entanglements, to stop spending blood and treasure in the Middle East, to bring the troops home and focus on America first. For this faction, the Iran war was always a problem. The escalation created costs in oil prices and economic disruption, in the human and financial cost of military operations that hit ordinary Americans in ways that the abstract strategic gains of the hawk faction do not compensate for. These are the Republicans who quietly like the idea of finding an off-ramp, even if they cannot say so publicly, in the current environment without catching fire from the hawkish base. Trump is caught right in the middle of that split. He built his political brand on being simultaneously tougher than the establishment hawks, nobody tougher, maximum pressure, blow them to kingdom come, and more skeptical of foreign military entanglements than traditional Republican foreign policy thinking. No more dumb wars, America first, bring the troops home. In normal circumstances, those two instincts do not fully conflict, because you can posture aggressively without actually going to war. But once the war started, once the military operations were underway, and the stakes were real, the tension between those two instincts became impossible to paper over. Being tough means finishing the job in ways the hawks can respect. Being war skeptical means finding the exit before the costs get too high. And finding a deal that satisfies both of those imperatives simultaneously, that lets Trump claim he was tough while also claiming he ended an unpopular war, is genuinely difficult when the hawks are watching every term of the negotiation and calling anything less than total Iranian capitulation a surrender. The practical political stakes of the Republican split on this issue are enormous. The conflict between Trump and Senate Republicans over the Iran deal is not just an internal party disagreement. It has real consequences for Trump's ability to govern effectively and to maintain the unified Republican coalition that his second-term agenda depends on. The Senate Republican caucus is not infinitely loyal. It is shown on various spending battles, on occasional foreign policy votes, that there are limits to how far Republican senators will follow Trump when they believe he is making serious mistakes. And the Iran deal backlash is generating the kind of specific, named, on-the-record criticism from senior senators that can shift the political environment in ways that make it harder for Trump to implement his preferred approach without significant political costs. If Cruz and Graham and Wicker keep publicly calling the deal a disaster, if their criticism resonates with the Republican base that still broadly supports a hawkish foreign policy, it creates a situation where Trump either has to accept a deal his own party's most prominent voices are denouncing as a surrender, or he has to walk away from the deal and accept the consequences of a prolonged conflict that is hurting the economy and his approval ratings. Section 2. Neither of those options is comfortable, and the fact that prominent Republicans are boxing him in from the hawkish direction means he has less room to maneuver toward the exit than he would have if his party was unified behind the peace process. Now, let us also talk about what is happening on the Democratic side of this fight, because one of the most striking features of the current Iran debate is that Trump is genuinely getting hammered from both directions simultaneously. Democrats have been attacking him for starting the war and expanding it, for the strikes and the blockade and the escalation that led to the current crisis. They have introduced resolutions trying to rein in Trump's war authority. They have pointed to the economic cost of the conflict, the oil prices, the global disruption, as evidence that the entire military adventure was a mistake. And now the same Democrats who attacked Trump for the war are watching Republican hawks attack him for considering peace and using that Republican criticism as additional evidence that Trump mismanaged the Iran situation so badly that he cannot find an exit that satisfies anyone. That bipartisan criticism, hawks from the right saying the deal is a surrender, progressives from the left saying the war was wrong, puts Trump in a position where whatever he does generates opposition from multiple directions. If he makes the deal, Cruz and Graham call it appeasement. If he walks away from the deal, Democrats point to the continued economic cost and the continued human toll. There is no clean exit from a war that started badly and has been conducted in ways that satisfy neither the maximum pressure crowd nor the end the war crowd. And the political consequences of that impossible position are showing up in the growing chorus of bipartisan criticism that is making the second term increasingly difficult to navigate. Let us think about what this situation reveals about the fundamental tension in Trump's foreign policy approach. There is a structural problem at the heart of his Iran strategy that the current Republican backlash is exposing clearly. Trump's approach to adversaries has always combined two elements: aggressive, threatening rhetoric and a genuine preference for deals over prolonged conflicts. Blow them to kingdom come if no deal is reached, but also, we are getting closer to a deal. 50-50 odds on an agreement. Both of those things are real. Both reflect genuine aspects of how Trump operates. And they work well together in a pre-conflict context where the threatening rhetoric creates pressure and the deal-making instinct provides an off-ramp before anyone has to test whether threats are real. But once the conflict has actually started, once the strikes have happened, the blockade is in place, the casualties are real on both sides, the deal-making instinct runs directly into the military gains that the hawks are arguing need to be fully consolidated before any deal is made. The threatening rhetoric created expectations among Trump's hawkish base that the conflict would end on American terms, with Iran fundamentally changed, its nuclear program stopped, its regional influence curtailed. And the deal that is being considered apparently does not deliver those outcomes, which is why the hawks are calling it a surrender, and why Trump is losing support in the face of criticism from people who are supposed to be his most reliable supporters on exactly this kind of issue. This is a moment of reckoning for Trump's foreign policy approach. The tension between his instincts has been exposed in the most dramatic possible way, and the consequences are playing out in real time with Republican senators openly defying him on one of the most consequential foreign policy decisions of his presidency. The Republican hawk criticism of Trump's Iran deal is real, specific, and serious. This is not political theater from the opposition. This is not Democrats calling Trump weak. This is Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, and Roger Wicker, three of the most prominent Republican voices on national security in the entire Senate, going on the record with detailed, specific criticisms of the terms Trump is reportedly considering. They are not just saying they want a tougher deal. They are saying the reported terms represent a catastrophic error and a disaster. They are using language that frames the deal as a historic foreign policy failure on the level of the worst mistakes made by previous administrations. And they are saying it before the deal is finalized, which means they are actively trying to shape the political environment to make it harder for Trump to accept those terms. That is a genuine, documented, consequential intra-party confrontation over one of the most important foreign policy decisions of Trump's second term, and it deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as partisan posturing. The GOP split on Iran reflects a deeper tension in the Republican coalition that predates this specific conflict. The divide between Republican hawks who want maximum pressure maintained until genuine Iranian concessions are secure and war-weary populists who supported Trump precisely because he promised to end foreign military entanglements. That divide is not new. It has been present in the Republican Party since the Iraq War created deep skepticism about military intervention among a segment of the conservative base. Trump's political genius in 2016 was to harness that war skepticism while simultaneously appealing to the hawks by promising to be stronger than anyone who came before him. But governing, actually having to make real decisions about real wars with real consequences, requires choosing between those two imperatives rather than simply promising both simultaneously. The Iran conflict has forced exactly that choice. And the visible split in the Republican Senate caucus over the deal is the consequence of a tension that was always there but could be managed while Trump was a candidate or a former president and is now impossible to paper over when he is a sitting president making real war and peace decisions. Trump being attacked from both left and right on Iran creates a genuinely difficult governing situation. When a president loses support from his own party's hawks while simultaneously being attacked by the opposition for the underlying war, when there is no version of Iran policy that generates broad support from either his own coalition or the general public, the political space for effective governing on that issue shrinks dramatically. Trump cannot end the war on the terms the hawks demand without risking a prolonged conflict that continues to damage the economy and his approval ratings. He cannot accept the terms that would let him exit without provoking a genuine rupture with the foreign policy wing of his own party. And he cannot simply continue the status quo with military operations paused, but no formal resolution indefinitely, without the pressure from both directions continuing to build. The box he is in on Iran is genuinely tight, and the bipartisan nature of the criticism he is receiving from hawks on his right and progressives on his left is making it tighter every week that the situation remains unresolved. How Trump navigates the GOP hawk rebellion on Iran will define his control over the Republican Party on foreign policy for the rest of his second term. This is the big picture consequence that the day-to-day drama is obscuring. If Trump makes a deal over the objections of Cruz and Graham and Wicker, if he accepts terms they have publicly called a disaster and a surrender, he either brings them around through the political persuasion that usually follows a presidential decision, or he establishes that his hawkish base will openly defy him on matters of national security. Either outcome has lasting consequences. A successful persuasion where the hawks grumble and then fall in line reinforces Trump's dominance of the Republican foreign policy agenda. A genuine rupture, where the hawks continue to publicly call the deal a surrender regardless of what Trump says, would represent a significant fracture in the coalition that has made Trump's second term possible. If Trump walks away from the deal under pressure from the hawks, if their criticism actually changes his decision, that establishes a different kind of precedent. One where powerful Republican senators can move Trump off his stated positions by applying public pressure loud enough and sustained enough. Both of those scenarios matter enormously for the rest of this term and for the future of the Republican Party. Watch this space, because the Iran deal fight is not just about Iran. It is about power, loyalty, and who ultimately controls the direction of American foreign policy in Trump's second term. And we will be right here when the answer becomes clear. The broader historical context makes this GOP rebellion on Iran so significant. American foreign policy has always had a hawkish wing and a more cautious wing, and presidents of both parties have had to navigate that internal tension within their own coalitions when making war and peace decisions. But what is unusual about the current situation is the speed and the openness with which the hawkish wing of Trump's own party is moving against him on an issue where he would normally expect deference. Republican foreign policy hawks typically give Republican presidents significant latitude on national security decisions. They criticize Democratic presidents loudly and Republican presidents quietly, working through private channels before going public. The fact that Cruz and Graham and Wicker are going public loudly, repeatedly, with specific condemnations before the deal is even finalized, tells you that the normal deference has broken down. That the hawks do not trust the private channels to produce the result they want. That they have made a calculated decision that public pressure is their best tool for influencing the outcome. That calculation, the decision that going public is more effective than staying private, reflects a judgment about Trump's decision-making process. It suggests that the hawks believe Trump is genuinely inclined to make the deal, and that only public political pressure can change that inclination. Which means they are treating Trump's position on Iran the same way opposition politicians treat a president they distrust, using the pressure of public criticism and potential political costs, rather than the persuasion of private consultation. That is a remarkable dynamic within a party and an administration, and it tells you something important about the limits of loyalty even among Trump's most consistent supporters when they believe the stakes are high enough. The strategic situation in the Middle East beyond the internal American political dynamics is also significant. The Republican hawk criticism is not just political positioning. It is based on a substantive strategic argument that deserves to be engaged seriously. Wicker and Cruz and Graham are arguing that the military operations against Iran, Operation Epic Fury and related strikes, achieved something real. They degraded Iranian military capacity. They demonstrated that the United States and Israel were willing to absorb the cost of military conflict rather than back down from Iranian threats. they shifted the regional balance of power in ways that created genuine leverage for negotiation. And their argument is that this leverage, this genuine shift in the military balance, needs to be converted into a permanent political settlement before it is traded away in a ceasefire agreement that restores the pre-conflict status quo with cosmetic modifications. That is a coherent strategic argument. It may or may not be correct. Reasonable people can disagree about how much leverage was actually created and whether it can realistically be converted into the kind of comprehensive settlement the hawks are demanding. But it is not simply political posturing. It is a substantive position about strategic opportunity costs that any honest assessment of the Iran situation has to engage with rather than dismiss. And the fact that it is being made by the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, someone who has access to classified briefings and intelligence assessments that inform his judgment, means it cannot be waved away as uninformed criticism from people who do not understand the situation. The fight between Trump and Republican hawks over the Iran deal is ultimately a fight about what kind of country the United States wants to be in the world and what role military power, economic pressure, and negotiated settlements should play in advancing American interests and protecting American security. Those are not questions with simple answers. They are questions that have been debated throughout American history, and that every generation has to answer in the context of its own circumstances. The hawks who are attacking Trump's deal represent one answer, an answer that says American strength must be maintained and demonstrated, that adversaries must be made to pay genuine costs for threatening American interests, and that premature compromise signals weakness that invites future aggression. Trump's instinct toward the deal represents a different answer, one that says the costs of prolonged conflict are too high, that the economic disruption is hurting Americans who can least afford it, and that a negotiated settlement that reduces immediate threats is better than a military victory that remains elusive. Neither of those answers is simply right or simply wrong. They reflect different values and different assessments of what is achievable and at what cost, and the argument between them, playing out right now in Senate hearing rooms and White House meetings and diplomatic back channels and viral news clips, is one of the most consequential arguments in American politics. What Trump decides will shape American foreign policy for years. How the Republican Party navigates the split will shape its identity for a generation. And what the outcome means for the people of the United States and the broader Middle East, for the ordinary human beings whose lives are most directly affected by war and peace decisions made in Washington, is the deepest question underneath all of it. The Republican senators who are attacking Trump's deal are not going to disappear. They are going to keep speaking out. They are going to keep applying pressure, and they are going to keep making the case that Trump is making a catastrophic mistake. Whether Trump listens to them or whether he proceeds with the deal over their objections will determine not just the fate of this specific negotiation, but the future of the Republican Party's foreign policy identity and Trump's control over his own coalition. The Iran deal fight is far from over. Negotiations, pressure, and uncertainty continue. The Republican fracture over foreign policy is deepening, and the outcome will shape Trump's second term and the party for years to come. Stay tuned.